Welcome back everyone, it's Mags, and something I think about a lot when it comes to NIS is how much I appreciate the effort they put into their crossover content. I mean, sure, in the modern age of the internet, you can easily find a whole comprehensive list of games they've worked on, but not everybody's gonna think to do that, and even if they do, is that really as exciting as getting to see a real glimpse of those franchises through specially made content in the game you're already playing? It shows that the developer still cares about those franchises and sends a signal that says, hey, check this one out. NIS is just one of those developers that can't help but shove every reference possible into their games, and not even just of their own IPs. Name any special skill in Disgaea, and it's probably a reference to some decades-old mecha anime. But when it comes to their own output, there's no end to guest characters and content that explicitly come from their other works, beckoning the players to explore the huge, interconnected world that is NIS. All of this to say, Witch and the Hundred Knight was one such game that was in the front of my mind because I remembered Metalia from Disgaea 5, and the more I looked into it, the more interesting it seemed. Released in 2013 for the PS3, then re-released only a year later for the PS4 as Revival, Witch and the Hundred Knight is an action RPG developed and published by Nipponichi Software. This was a title that shocked people upon announcement. It was a truly earth-shattering release from NIS, one that made fans quake in their boots at the mere sight of the third dimension. Yeah, it's 3D. That's the oddity. Up until this point, the good old NIS specialized in their 2D, sprite-based, top-down RPGs. Not that that's all they put out, but a ton of beloved titles of this type emerged in their early days. Phantom Brave, La Pucelle, ZHP, and their most popular series, Disgaea. In an era where everyone felt like they had to make the big jump to 3D on PlayStation, NIS stuck true to their guns and kept doing what they did best. So imagine how much of a shock it was when they finally announced a game like Witch and the Hundred Knight, a much more down-to-earth RPG compared to the other titles listed, and fully in 3D. But at its heart, it's the same NIS you know and love. Quirky characters, an earnest story, complex mechanics, it's just that now the environments look dull. The original version was actually announced as early as 2010 and was slated for a 2011 release, but kept getting endlessly delayed, so it's no surprise that development on it was a little rough. Keep that in mind. We're looking at the Revival Edition for PS4, the definitive version of the game, which added some quality of life features, a couple of new mechanics, and an entire dedicated grinding dungeon. The story follows the Hundred Knight itself, an adorable little creature who's been suddenly summoned by a witch named Metalia to do her bidding, and her bidding is spreading her swamp across the world. She lives in solitude as the Swamp Witch with none but her butler Arlecchino, and being unable to survive for very long outside the swamp, summons the Hundred Knight to help her expand her territory. The Hundred Knight is a magical being, a soulless creature, and thus a totally silent protagonist. Except not totally silent. Throughout the story, you can express some general emotions to change the dialogue a bit, but nothing that actually means anything outside a couple crucial moments. It's meant to represent the fact that the Hundred Knight, despite being a magical creature, still has somewhat of a will, which is kind of not supposed to happen. This makes the Hundred Knight a pretty mysterious and interesting character, but the story is really all about Metalia. You're just there to fight for her, and as such, get to witness her life and story as somewhat of a fly on the wall. Metalia is cold and ruthless. She doesn't seem to care about anyone or anything, and all you can do is watch as she rampages the land, threatening to kill anyone who gets in her way, and you know damn well she would. This is a much darker story than you'd expect from NIS, but not in a bad way at all. Metalia is cruel, but she's also a very deep and fleshed out character. Over time, you come to understand not only why she is the way she is, but really that her intentions don't come from a place of malice at all. And most importantly, the game doesn't try to justify her actions. Yes, she's been totally screwed over by the world and those around her, but Metalia has always been a bratty, arrogant kid, only looking out for herself and unwilling to hear the side of others. And she's still that same kid, an unbelievably powerful witch, but immature and quick to pull the trigger, even on those who should be important to her. The entire point is that she's not a good person, and in this universe, it's widely thought that that's how a witch should be. They're all cruel in some way, shape, or form, but Metalia clearly doesn't know when enough is enough. Instead, the story is more of an exploration of her character, and you can't help but sympathize with her by the end because you understand her so deeply. Through all of her flaws and all the bullshit she pulls throughout the story, you get to see that even someone like her is still a person. She has her own feelings, things that make her tick, things she would fight to protect, and even people she cares about. The dark nature of the events of the game perfectly suit the story they wanted to tell here, and it really pays off, especially in the endgame. I did feel like the game really dragged in the middle. I don't think it needed to be as long as it was, but all I could think after I actually did finish it was how much I love the way Metalia was written. The rest of the main cast is pretty entertaining too, and they do have their own little things going on, but Metalia is clearly front and center. I also really appreciated how unpredictable the story was. You never quite know what's going to happen. I mean, hell, near the very beginning, I thought they were setting up someone to be the main antagonist, and that could not have been any further from the truth. Characters you think will be enemies become allies or vice versa, and Metalia herself is just a loose cannon that pulls the poor Hundred Knight every which way. I would genuinely say the game is worth playing for the story alone. Now, this is an action RPG, which means real-time fighting. It has you running around different maps and hacking and slashing enemies, picking up weapons and other items you can then use. To prevent you from completing stages too quickly, there's a survival aspect. Running around consumes gigacals. As long as you have them, you'll automatically heal over time, which consumes them quicker, but once you're out, you'll start losing health. If you die, you'll just consume some gigacals to respawn and lose some items you picked up as a little penalty. You only truly die if you don't have any HP or gigacals left. But even then, you're just booted to the hub and get to keep all your progress and experience, with the exception of items you picked up while you were out. The items you pick up go into your stomach stock, the Hundred Knight literally eats them, and they don't go into your inventory proper until you return to the hub. You don't get any experience until then either. All your spoils just accumulate and you get it all at once when you make it back home. Your level, interestingly enough, isn't necessarily fixed. It's attached to specific classes you have on the Hundred Knight, called facets, which all have different stats and even unique passive abilities that can significantly change your experience. You can equip one main facet and 2 sub-facets, and your actual level is just whatever level your main facet is. Your sub-facets only get a third of the experience you bring back from maps, so if you want to keep multiple ones up to snuff, you'll need to change them out. When it comes to the combat itself, your combos are totally dependent on the weapons you have equipped. You can equip 5 weapons at a time and choose the order they'll be used in, with weapons later in the combo getting a bit of an attack boost. Your combos are going to feel very different depending on the types of weapons you're using, from lances to hammers to spears to swords, but at the end of the day, you're still just kinda whacking and slashing. Weapons also have a chance to be either common, rare, epic, or legendary in rarity, based on pure RNG, with higher rarities being stronger than the lower counterparts. Along with different weapon types, you have different damage types that enemies will have resistances to. A weapon can have slash, blunt, or magic damage. Most weapons specialize in one, but you can still find nearly any weapon with nearly any damage type. Not only that, but there's also the magic die system to factor in. Every weapon comes with a random magic die value from 1 to 5. Stacking consecutive numbers next to each other in your combo will make the damage boost more significant. All of these systems, from which damage type your weapons have, to the rarity, to the magic die value, is all RNG. So setting a loadout really just comes down to sifting through all the weapons you've happened to pick up and deciding which damage type you want to prioritize and which weapons you want later in the combo for the bigger damage boosts. I found that the combat itself was so simple that it hardly even mattered what the weapons actually were. As long as you're spamming attack, you'll attack alright. That's largely in thanks to the lock-on feature. Holding the left bumper will automatically lock onto an enemy, and when you attack, it'll be targeted towards that enemy. Before I really got into the habit of using it, I chose my weapon loadouts carefully based on how much of a pain in the ass they were to hit enemies with. For example, lances have some of the strongest attack in the game, but have abysmal AoE, only attacking straight in front of you, so I avoided them like the plague, until I realized, oh, locking on just makes aiming a complete non-issue, and from there, it comes down to mostly just being mindless. They try to spice it up a little bit with other things like the perfect dodge ability, where hitting the dodge button right before an attack hits you slows down time and gives you a chance to attack enemies more. Don't say it, don't think it, don't. It's a pretty cool feature that's especially useful in boss fights. There's also Tochka, which are special magic abilities you can use. You just unlock these as you go, or from special chests you find from exploring, and they're meant to be either useful tools for map traversal or alternate weapons, like a bomb you can plant or little batarangs you can throw. They're nothing too groundbreaking. I mostly found them useful for using damage types that may have been more convenient than my normal weapon combo offered, like the projectiles being easy slash damage. That's it. So when it comes to the combat in general, there's just not much you can really do in the way of mobility or anything else that really makes it more dynamic. Even the dodge isn't actually mobility. You'd think it would be something like a roll, but you just kind of do this little hop that doesn't change your movement at all. I really think this game could have used a more fleshed out combat system. But this is NIS we're talking about. Maybe they wanted to focus more on the strategy elements, what with building a combo set and using all these damage types and magic die boosts to carefully consider your loadout. that's the fun, right? Except, the primary way you get weapons outside the shop, whose stock is normally way underpowered anyway, is from just randomly picking them up in maps, either from chests or killing enemies, so I honestly find having to strategize so much with items you just happen to have on you a little silly. And besides, if they knew their combat was so simple and strategizing was meant to be the point, then why make your maps so massive? Let me just say that exploring these maps is optional. If you're just bum rushing the story, a lot of these can be cleared in no time flat, barring any grinding you do. But if you're anything like me, so much of your time will be spent like this. To get 100% completion on a map, you have to uncover it by literally walking everywhere. Not just visiting all the key locations or seeing what loot you can find up there in the northwest corner. No, the terrain is uncovered in a small area around you on the map as you walk, and the percent exploration is determined by how much is uncovered. Which means you have to take your little blorbo feet and stomp them on every square inch of these huge open maps. Do you see this map right here? I lost my exploration progress on this, so I had to do it all again. Even knowing exactly how the map was laid out and where to go, this clocked me 26 minutes of nothing but pure walking. The visuals for map exploration really bug me too. It's not even satisfying seeing a complete map, because you'll still see purple areas still visible on top of terrain you can't walk on. Why they didn't just limit this to walkable terrain, I have no idea. Even when you've uncovered everything you can, the map still just looks like a mess. I wish they had at least used some sort of unit, like maybe make the map grid-based and you'd uncover all the squares as you walk over them. Then you'd be able to see all the uncovered squares and have something to latch onto, some kind of clean outline. But here, it's the Wild West. The maps are even so big that you can have a pretty sizable purple stain spilled on a walkable area and still have the map registered as 100% complete. And on the flip side, you have my experience in Chocoletta's Palace, where I had 99% exploration and couldn't figure out where I hadn't gone until I randomly walked through this teleporter between two areas I had already explored, but I guess I must have just squeezed out one more pixel of purple because I suddenly had 100% completion. You do need to do this for trophies, by the way, I'm not that insane. But alright, there must be loot or other good stuff you'll find by exploring, right? It's gotta be worth it. Kind of. The best thing out there are stomach stones, which let you store more items in your stomach to bring back with you, which are incredibly useful. And you can also find new Tochka abilities, but there just aren't really enough of them for the sheer amount of walking you're gonna do. I never really felt that excitement of, ooh, what am I gonna find here? What kind of goodies are there gonna be? Because it's either just going to be a stomach stone, the very rare Tochka ability, or other than that, the very best you're going to do is a small chest that's going to have a completely useless piece of equipment in it. Needless to say, the gameplay left a lot to be desired. There just isn't that much to chew on. Maybe I'm more worn out because this thing squeezed 90 hours out of me for the platinum, but even for more casual play, I felt that going through maps just wasn't as fun as it should have been. And the thing is, it feels like they did try to add more depth, just not in quite the right way. The game has some other systems to it that are pretty unique, but not very fleshed out, and ultimately feel like they were just adding features to add features. I'm talking about things like karma and raiding houses. You'll find these villages or random houses scattered around that you can raid for loot. You have to be strong enough for it, and doing so will raise your karma, basically an evil meter that comes with some drawbacks, namely items being more expensive in shops. To lower it back down, you have to spend a currency called anima, which you can only get as random enemy drops. And that's the entirety of the system. There's no benefit to doing any of it besides some loot you might want from a house, which for the most part you can totally go without. Killing villagers also raises your karma, and that's about it. It just makes your life harder, and then you might want to lower your karma back down. It's a pretty half-baked system that doesn't have any reason to exist other than maybe being an in-game representation of, hey, look how evil we're being. And then they suddenly force you to use it to progress late into the game with basically no direction on what to do. Fantastic idea. But hey, there's one other major thing to look at, which is the Tower of Illusion. This is an entire dedicated grinding dungeon that you can progress through at the same pace as the main story. There are 100 floors to go through, but only 10 are available when you first unlock it, with 10 more opening up with each chapter of the story you reach. The floors are pretty simple and cycle between a bunch of pre-made layouts, and you have to kill all the enemies on each floor to progress. However, enemies don't get stronger the farther you go. Instead, you set the strength of enemies by sacrificing a weapon to enter. The higher the rank of the weapon, the higher level the enemies will be. Just like the floors though, this is also capped. You can't sacrifice too high of a rank even if you have it until you progress the story more. It feels a little odd because then it doesn't actually matter which floors you go to as long as you have a good weapon to sacrifice, so what's the point of it being 100 floors? Some sort of super boss at the end? Well, there is a boss, but that's because the entire Tower of Illusion has its own progressing storyline. The point of clearing the next 10 floors is to see what happens and to progress the tower's story, and each 10th floor houses a boss. I find this to be amazing, because if there's one thing I like about Witch and the Hundred Knight, it is the story. So having more story attached to an extra optional dungeon that you can keep up with while grinding in the new unlocked floors to level up each chapter is a pretty fantastic idea. And I do love the tower's story. It's not just some throwaway scenario, it hits hard at the end. The Hundred Knight stumbles upon this alternate version of Metalia who calls herself Leah and doesn't recognize the Hundred Knight. But just like Metalia, she decides to make him her servant and make you fight for her as she climbs the tower. Along the way, you meet all the other main characters, but they're also alternate versions who start out not knowing each other. I fully expected this to actually tie into the main story, but it never happens. You kind of just have to accept that this is the tower story, and that's the main story. The tower really takes the opportunity to explore the dynamics of the party, who are all trying to climb the tower together for their own reasons as a band of travelers. Something about it just feels cozy. I really love the more laid-back tone it has. I ended up getting more invested in the tower story than the main story for a while. And there's a pretty good reason it doesn't feed into the main story, and that's because the Tower of Illusion wasn't in the original release. It was only added in the Revival Edition. And you can really tell with the way it throws the difficulty off balance. Just progressing through the tower, assuming you sacrifice the new highest rank of item you can in each chapter, keeps you way over leveled without even having to try, which only added to the mindlessness of going through the maps. There were quite a few chapters where I felt like I didn't even have to kill any of the enemies at all. I went into a map, explored the entire thing, and defeated the boss while ignoring enemies entirely. Taken on its own though, the tower is a fun addition. It provides that dopamine rush I always love in RPGs of just having a place you can grind in and watch the numbers go up, and I was always looking forward to what the next boss would be. And again, making it to the end is well worth it. The dialogue had me damn near tearing up. So you would think it would be a nice surprise to hear that it doesn't actually end there. After you clear the tower, an entire new set of floors opens up going downwards. These basement floors have you sacrificing 2 weapons to get in. The second weapon supercharges the enemies far more than what just one weapon would. Even sacrificing 2 rank 1 weapons puts the enemies in the level 80s. This is the ultimate endgame content. You even get a short cutscene when you unlock it, so I'm sure you'll be looking forward to what new story awaits you there. I'm gonna rip the band-aid off, there is none. It's an endless mode. There is genuinely no story, no events, no cutscenes, nothing but endless floors with extremely strong enemies. You know, for funsies. Which is fine, you did the whole tower story and now you get this little extra endless mode. I do wish they added something else here though, because as is, there's really no point to getting this strong. Otherwise, the strongest you'll have to be is to just clear the main story. It would be really nice if there was at least a super boss or something. So really, this can be totally ignored. Ah, shit. There is a trophy for reaching basement floor 100 on maximum difficulty, which means sacrificing 2 max rank weapons. Just because the enemies can reach level 99 with much lower ranks than that, doesn't mean they can't still get stronger. All their stats get a massive boost for sacrificing higher rank weapons. So it's about grinding the hell out of the game and getting strong enough to not get absolutely obliterated the second you walk in the door. The most efficient way is grinding for strong catalysts. When you upgrade a weapon or armor piece, you have to not only sacrifice a different weapon to contribute to its stats, but you also have to combine it with a special type of item called a catalyst that can grant all different kinds of effects, like increasing crit chances, attack power, HP, etc. Since you can actually exit the tower anytime you want through the bulb at the start of each floor, you can save scum the basement at max difficulty. Even if you're way too weak for it, you can look for chests on the floor you spawn on and hope for good catalysts, then keep upgrading your weapons and armor with them. Eventually, you'll get stronger and even be able to start killing some of the enemies, which speeds up the process since that's more chances for catalysts to drop, rinse and repeat. The actual weapons and armor you find won't have much higher stats than what you can find on lower difficulties, but catalysts sure as hell do, and they'll get you very far. There's also the ultimate catalyst called a condensed mana pearl, which you can only use on a weapon once. They're always legendary rarity and straight up skyrocket your weapon's attack power. For some reason, there's also a trophy for using one. These can just be found as random drops like anything else, likely most common on max level basement floors. Through brute forcing catalysts and upgrading your weapons and armor through them, you can get to the point where surviving max level basement is easy. So after all of that, it's just a matter of grinding out 100 floors. Right? Get ready to bust out Red Dwarf again. I promise you, this takes 30 times longer than you think it does. because climbing 100 floors, contrary to common sense, does not actually mean clearing 100 rooms. No, floors can be separated into separate rooms. They start to pull some of that in the main tower, but in the basement, floors can have anywhere from 3 to 9 separate rooms before you actually technically reach the next floor. Which means at worst, you're looking at more like 900 floors. Really, for an average, it's gonna be 600 or 700. Yeah, only. It is mind-numbingly tedious. Why they decided to make you do this, I have no idea. It's absurd. You'd think there's at least something waiting for you at floor 100, but I'm gonna lay it on you, there's not. Floor 100 is a normal floor just like any other, and the cold indifference of the universe dictates that when you complete it, the floor counter ticks to 101 and the relentless march of time falters not. I must have clocked at least 12 hours just getting to floor 100. I could have played the entire Azure Striker Gunvolt series in that time. Why did I need to do this? Which in the Hundred Knight has a lot of shortcomings. It's very clear how rushed and troubled its development was, even with the Revival re-release. If it weren't for the clear passion it has in its vision, I probably wouldn't have come out of it with very positive feelings. But despite what I've said about its gameplay and systems, there is something really special about this game. It is earnest. The story has strong messages and things that it needs to say. The characters are entertaining and well written, there's something so mysterious and interesting about the Hundred Knight itself, not to mention it's adorable. And I need to stress again that at the end of it all, I felt that it was all worth it. The main story, I mean, not the platinum. It finishes off incredibly strong. Just know that there are a couple of different endings. What's labeled as the true ending ends on chapter 11, but if you go back and kill 3 optional bosses you can find throughout the game and then finish chapter 11, you'll be launched into a few more chapters, which despite being labeled as the bad ending is actually the true ending, in the socially accepted definition that it is the canonical one and actually wraps up the story. I guess I can kind of see why they'd label it bad, but it's the true ending. And if you ask me, the one that's actually labeled true ending that ends on chapter 11 is much worse. I would be remiss not to mention the soundtrack as well, composed by the one and only Tenpei Sato, who NIS uses for a lot of their games, including Disgaea, and you can really hear it. Which in the Hundred Knight has got to be some of his best work. I am absolutely in love with this soundtrack. Even if you don't play the game, at least listen to the music, you will not be disappointed. The game did receive a sequel, by the way, released in 2017. I haven't gotten around to playing it yet, but maybe it cleans up the gameplay. That's all I can really hope for. I gave this game a lot of flack, but the truth is that it still has a unique experience to offer, and that combined with its beautiful story is why I quite appreciate Witch in the Hundred Knight. I've been Mags, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.